in Calgary. All right, looks like we have a good crowd here. I wish I could see all of you in a big room, but here we are. We're virtual, and welcome to our session. This is and we're going to share our experiences on what we've learned from migrating over 80 websites during uncertainty, and that such uncertainty is, of course, the pandemic. If we can move on to the next slide, we'll just get started with some introductions. And I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie to start.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. And so my name is Stephanie Enoch. I am the Assistant Director for Web Development at Trinity University, which is located in San Antonio, Texas. Trinity is about a school about 2,000 students. And I am one of about a 22-person strategic communications and marketing team on campus. And out of those 22 marketers, there are about 3 dedicated FTEs or full-time employees that are dedicated towards web. For this particular project that we'll be talking about today, I was the project lead or project owner. And if you have any questions about anything we've talked about today and you want to reach out to me directly, you can email me at senoch@trinity.edu.
All right, thanks, Steph. And hi again, my name is Sarah Wall. I'm the Director of Business Analysis and Quality Assurance at ImageX. I manage a growing global team of BA and QA team members. On this particular project, I also work on projects, and I was the project manager. And you can see my contact information there. Will also be available at the ImageX booth after the session if we do run out of time for Q&A. So I'll pass it on to the next person.
That would be me. Hi, everyone. I'm Anisha Rawat Anand, and I am Senior Project Manager here at ImageX. For this particular project, I did step in as a Senior Business Analyst, helping oversee the project in terms of the information architecture and all the whole content strategy piece. If you have any questions about the work that I've done here, my email is anisha@imagexmedia.com. I'm going to pass it over to Marta.
Good. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Marta Bainan. I'm a Senior Business Analyst at ImageX, working in the same capacity on this project. Very exciting project. And I will be jumping into the expo booth. If you need to contact me, you can find my contact there on the screen, marta@imagexmedia.com. Thank you.
All right, thought we'd start us off with a nice quote, because this does say a lot about our experience together on this project. So from Helen Keller, "Alone we can do so little, and together we can do so much." So this was a Herculean effort with not only the team that you see here on the screen, but many of us were involved that are not able to join us today for the panel discussion, because we're limited to our numbers. But it was a really great exercise in teamwork. And just moving on to the next slide, we're going to get into the challenge. Steph will take that on and describe the what we did, and then I'll elaborate on that after that. So moving on to Steph's part. Thank you.
Absolutely. So starting a little bit from the beginning, Trinity had several microsites on the Drupal 7 platform, knowing that we had to migrate to Drupal 8. So we actually started this project back in 2019, and we basically phased it out in 2 phases. So phase 1 was completed in fall of 2020. It consisted of migrating our main Trinity website, which was new.trinity.edu at the beginning, over into Drupal 8. And then we worked with ImageX specifically on this project, which was migrating the additional microsites, which contained approximately 80 plus university offices and university program websites to also transfer over to Drupal 8. So before just migrating, we had to kind of see what we were working with. And so here are some of the challenges that we considered before the project began in order to help us out with our project planning. So as we started to really look at the content that we had, we discovered that our content was like a file cabinet. So at Trinity, we have a decentralized approach where we rely on what we call web champions or department or office content owners to basically be accountable for the upkeep of their websites. It's great when you have a small team, but in our instance, over the years, it really started to develop like a file cabinet. There was plenty of outdated content, there was duplicate content, and there's just content that we threw up and we forgot about over the years. So that was kind of the main driving point, is that we knew we had to focus on our end users, number one, because they were dying for a better website experience. And so we kind of took the Mary Kondo approach. So if those of you who are familiar with that Netflix special where she brings joy to organizing and tidying up, we kind of took that approach before we began this project. And then another reason, Drupal forced our hand, and we're so glad they did. So we were on Drupal 7 for at least 6 or 7 years, and we were excited about the Drupal 8 platform capabilities, and also the end of life date basically forced us to do this project. Like, we had to do it, there was no choice. And then another reason is that, like I mentioned earlier, we had a bunch of microsites that were hard to manage just from a small team's perspective. And we also had a dedicated marketing website, which was new.trinity, and then also a public but not so private intranet where all of the internal content for offices and departments lived on inside.trinity.edu. And that's where we're going to talk about the most, the 80 plus websites that we migrated from inside.trinity.edu into our new big cohesive family of trinity.edu MVP website. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just a quick example to kind of show you that we were successful. So here's an example of a residential life office website. So on the left, you will see their main menu. And this is not all of it. So there are about 13 items in this top level menu tree. There were about 50 menu items in total. And so what we did, we worked together with ImageX to basically focus on information architecture. If anything we wanted to do out of this project and within this time frame that we had before the end of life date, we knew that we had to make sure our architecture was solid. And so we took both expertise from the ImageX team and then also did our own research to really figure out what our end users needed the most. And that's what you see on the right side. A beautiful, nice and clean top level architecture that's easy to navigate. And we also leveraged the new features within our Drupal 8 platform in order to create drop-down menus and et cetera to help the end users get to the content that they were most interested in. Next slide. Okay. So let's talk about scope and approach. So in total, there were 85 sites in this second phase that needed to be divided and conquered. Because of, number one, the pandemic and the small size of our team, we knew we needed to leverage ImageX's expertise, as they had a lot more resources than we did, but then we were also able to scrounge up some resources to help us get us through these times. So we divided the sites equally. We first focused on keeping the Trinity sites that we were responsible for those really high-level student-focused journey websites that were key indicators and key points that we could continue to measure and make those sites the most optimal, because we knew we had to keep and retain those customers. We also took the complicated sites. So at Trinity, we do a lot of things that are very, very unique, unique to Trinity. That's not unique. That's not common in the liberal arts world or just in higher education. So a lot of these sites, we had to read, understand, and ask questions to actually understand what they were trying to do and how these sites actually fit in. So we took the complicated sites that needed a lot of institutional knowledge, and we let ImageX take the reins and trusted them with being the expert on some of those sites that have common journeys with outside of higher ed. So for example, there's a human resources department at mainly every operation or institution. And so they were able to leverage outside expertise and to tell us what we should be doing rather than trying to make what we were doing uniquely at Trinity work as best practice. As far as a time frame, we had 6 months to do this. So we knew we couldn't make everything perfect. As bad as I wanted to make sure that all the content read beautifully, everything was designed perfectly, we had to target in and zero in on 2 key aspects. So we focused heavily on content strategy and information architecture in order to make sure it was solid. And then over time, throughout the years, we will continue to work with our web champions, our departments, in order to continue to improve their content. Next slide. Okay, so now I kind of talked about the approach. Let's talk about how we basically kind of stayed organized as we worked together with ImageX as a partner, and also with our campus stakeholders. So we are a Google school, so we use G Suite. And so we knew whatever communication tool and also project tools in order to stay organized had to fall within something that was easy to use, easy to share, and also easy to find. So we created some project planning templates in terms of Google Sheets, and we used some stakeholder surveys, which were Google Forms. We created a standard content strategy and information doc for all sites. So it was easy to kind of follow the template and figure out what key things we needed to add and what key things we needed to include. And then on top of this, we knew that essentially we didn't have time to make wireframes for every single site or full-fledged designs for every office. It would take us years to get those things approved with our stakeholders. So we came up with an idea of a component design library, basically taking elements that we had on our current site, learning from the Dewey Decimal System, and also getting inspiration from a Cheesecake Factory menu of like, we needed to organize these components so that they're easy to find, easy to indicate, and also we had an option for any type of content. This helped tremendously with our stakeholders because it helped them visualize the content that we were writing in the Google Docs and how it would formulate onto the website. And the little green indicator that you see on the screen where it says to call 32, that's how we identified where what component the content should fall in, so that it helped during the building phase for our builders to not guess on what to build. And so this was all really, really helpful. And the ones that you see on the screen that have links are actually takeaway documents for you guys. So when you get the recording, you'll be able to see kind of a sample of our templates.
Thank you, Steph. So yes, and we will have just another housekeeping item. We're going to have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions, but we are monitoring the chat as well. So happy to share those resources. So Steph described the challenge, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on what you talked about already for the how we did it. So on this slide, you can see we use a lot of different systems in order to collaborate. We were using both of our Google Drives, but primarily Trinity's because of all of the stakeholders that needed access to the documents. We couldn't have lived without Zoom, of course, as many of us in the pandemic, with relying on that for our video and essentially remote FaceTime and our meetings. So we connected our project management systems. At ImageX, we use Basecamp for client communications and to-do lists and storing important contractual documents. And we use Jira for primarily the execution of projects. So what I did was I created an epic in Jira, which linked to each one of Trinity's, if you want to call them sites or epics, in Airtable, so that we had the two systems connected. From there, I also had a dashboard in a Google Sheet, so it was an at-a-glance view at all of the projects we were working on. So projects and sites, and using that term interchangeably. So that spreadsheet I was in almost every day, as it was my dashboard, but it had links out to Airtable. It had links out to Jira as well. Now, we're very lucky that we're like an extended team. We're all one team, really. So we had the Trinity team members in our Jira working with us directly. And the way I chose to structure the tickets, because there was no real development work on this site, we did have a lead developer giving us some oversight if needed. But we structured each site with 3 main Jira tickets. One was for the business analysis and with links to each of the supporting documents, and it allowed Marta and Anisha to take notes and provide statuses on where they were at. Then we had a separate link ticket to the content strategy. So once we were done the analysis, we would pass that over to the Trinity team. They could give us feedback on the information architecture. And then ImageX was responsible for the homepage content strategy. While that was happening, the Trinity team was working very closely with their stakeholders to build out the remaining content and strategy with their stakeholders. The last ticket that we had was for the site build. And this was, again, a combination of our teams working very closely together, where we were building out the sites. So once those 3 tickets were done, they all got moved to done. I could close out the Epic, and I can tell you that the Jira roadmap feature was a very good friend of mine through this project. One of the challenges really was staying organized, because it was, for us, 40 websites, so 40 projects within a project. It was a lot to really to manage. Of course, we have Drupal in the center. Couldn't live without Drupal. This is the reason we're all here, and Acquia as well. A note on Asana. I initially started, that was a Trinity, that's where they manage all of their details for projects, similar to how we use Jira. And I started in there, and I realized I didn't need to be in there because Trinity was in our Jira. So rather than muddle things and make it complicated, I went in, took a look around, and thought, I'm going to get too many notifications, and asked if it was okay if I just stuck with Jira, and the decision was yes, that's fine. On the top right, we have Figma. Staff alluded to the design components that were used. Those were really helpful in how we reference them in the content strategy document. And Slack, another great communications tool, of course. We were in Trinity Slack, so we had a special Slack channel set up just for us, so we could maintain tight communications, and Steph didn't mind with my daily reminders of asking if things were ready yet. So all of these tools came together, and at the very end, a whole lot of love, teamwork, trust, open communication, daily communication is really how we got this all done. We can go on to the next one, please. All right, so here's where we get into the discussion. So I know we've given you the overview of the what and the how, and as I mentioned, we can hold some time for questions at the end. But if we go to the next one, I'm going to start and put the question out, starting with you, Steph. If you can share what your biggest challenge was starting out in this project.
My big challenge on the Trinity side was resources. Like I mentioned, we are a 3-person team out of 22 marketers that were also working on additional projects. So with the size and the scope of the project, I really needed to push for resources on the Trinity side because I couldn't depend on ImageX to do everything. They do not have the institutional knowledge, and there is just some part of the content on our site that Trinity needs to own and also develop. So I was able to at least get some additional resources within our marketing team. And that actually pulled from, people being vice presidents and above in terms of, and director levels in order to get this thing done. The other biggest challenge too is just choosing what to focus on. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a perfectionist. I wanted everything to be perfect, but that is just not scalable or attainable. We really had to think about what did we actually need to do before this end of life date, and what would put us on a path to move forward that we did not have to go back and redo work that we did now later.
And I'm also a bit of a perfectionist myself, so it's nice to work with another one. But as you said, we had to let go of some of those tendencies in order to get stuff done. So Marta, you're coming in with the senior business analyst hat on. What was your greatest challenge starting out?
Thank you. One of them is similar. I had the knowing when enough is enough. Definitely have a perfectionist hat on as well, but understanding, just being conscious of the scope and the boundary. So how far can we take things to get the biggest improvement team? Another piece was scheduling meetings, because we had several of the websites we're trying to manage at the same time. And wanting to be most efficient of our time, initially we set up placeholder meetings for them to come in and choose what worked best for them. And we would kind of set aside some just for this client. I'm saying client interchangeable with each of the different websites. And then another set of time blocks for the next website. But we realized that wasn't efficient. Someone might not have time until a week later, and then we've lost that opportunity of time slots. So when we changed that and made it more efficient, opening it up to, here are all of our time slots, just relabel things so that they understood which ones were mine versus Anisha's time. So, and then we just have to cross-reference who had accepted it to know which website it was for, and that made that far more efficient, and we were able to make up time and ground on that. Probably the last one is just the enormity of the context switching and multitasking, having 40 websites between Anisha and myself, and a different set of stakeholders for each one. I ended up setting up, I have a Mac, so I set up a different desktop for each website. So I could just swipe quickly to the one I needed. Okay, this one is residential, this one is human resources, etc., and then have all the tabs open and ready. It did mean I had to upgrade my computer though to handle all the Chrome tabs, but it definitely made it all worthwhile.
Thank you, Marta. There are some questions coming in, Steph. I don't know if you have a chance to browse them if you want to give some, in-time answers, but if not, we'll get some at the end. Otherwise,
sure.
I'll just jump in over to Anisha. With similar role as Marta, can you share what your biggest challenge was starting out?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, with the requirement of building out an information architecture and content strategy, I came in just making sure that the strategy that I'm offering is thinking about the broader picture and the broader lens, and not just isolated to those individual sites. So I think that in itself was a challenge, just getting quickly ramped up to the requirements that each of the stakeholders had, and then offering up a strategy that was not isolated to each of the microsites, and it's an approach that can be replicated across the broader, holistic view of the site. So one of the things that did help me, and I think that Stephanie and her team did a great job at this, is essentially coordinating upfront responses from the stakeholders. I know that the team had initially sent out essentially a survey, trying to get a really good gauge from the stakeholders and on a couple of things. One, just understanding their degree of knowledge and expertise in the digital space. So we didn't go into our meetings with these individual stakeholders assuming that they had that digital knowledge and expertise. And then second, just getting a better sense and understanding of their current content best practices, if any. So I think coming in with that initial set of understanding was really helpful for me when I dealt with the stakeholders one-on-one. And it also allowed me to keep some key factors in mind when presenting an IA or a content strategy, keeping in mind with respect to their current knowledge and expertise, and ensuring that we're not putting something as a proposal that requires further or added maintenance in the future that the stakeholders just will not be able to sustain. So it was a bit more of that holistic approach. Just keeping that in mind was initially a big challenge for me, but the knowledge that we gained up front was really helpful.
Tanisha, for myself, I mentioned earlier we did use a lot of tools, but I think the biggest challenge for me was upfront and planning the project. And the planning actually started when we were estimating before we started the project, of course. And so we already went in having a sense of the size of each site. Some were 1 pages, 5, 10, 50, and some were a few hundred pages. So it really was across the board. So it was really sitting down and looking at the size of each site and stacking it accordingly so that we could tackle the biggest, most complicated sites first to ensure that we would have enough time to reach the right amount of stakeholders and get the analysis done. And that was like Residential Life is the one you saw, was the one we actually tackled first. So it was a bit of it felt like an uphill climb. I wasn't always sure if we were going to make it in the early days. I was kind of hoping for the best, but knew in the end we would. But as we reach, we started in September last year, and as we reached December, I started to see a lot of the sites getting, knocked off the list, which was really encouraging. And then a lot of the big ones were completed by January. And so when we reached late January, early February, we could start to see a lot of the smaller ones being completed, and building so many sites concurrently at that point. But pleased to say that we got everything done on time and with no last minute crunch, which was pretty amazing. All right, let's move on to the next one, please. Oh, this is a good one. So we've had a lot of uncertainty in the last year, as I'm sure many of you can relate to, and especially with the pandemic, we've had to adjust to working in a different way, and just uncertainty around the pandemic in general. So I'll start off with you, Marta. How did you handle the situation last year and working remotely, and everything that you've had to deal with the pandemic?
It was definitely interesting. Let's put it that way. I think being in the right state of mind and being open and trying to be positive. This is our new adventure right now, has definitely helped having a positive attitude. Something that was quite critical for us in addition to that was having Stephanie and her team providing those information on each of these different websites and their stakeholders, understanding what's going on in their world, the challenges they're currently dealing with, what might be happening or not, the best way to communicate with them. That really helped as well, because we didn't have that background and that context. So that meant we could come in, hit the ground running, be more, be more patient or understanding as different things arose, and being more flexible. That was really, really important. One other fun aspect of working remotely is getting to know people within their own home lives context. It added another level of feeling connected with them, and then with us as well. And it have interesting moments when you have, I guess, pets or children coming in, and it just gave an extra level of levity to it, and would help reduce any of the anxiety or stress that just might be naturally part of having to work from home and being on Zoom all the time. So that was great.
So yes, I can identify to having the pet interruptions, and I've got to know a lot of your children as well. So it's been really a nice benefit of what's been going on over the last year. Anisha, what was going on with you during the pandemic and then this transition to remote work?
Yeah, I'll actually stem off of Marta's point. For me, one of the things that I experienced, or I just was cognizant that a lot of the stakeholders may be experiencing Zoom fatigue as much as I was. So whenever I needed to schedule a meeting that required a lot of conversation and just a lot of strategizing and thinking and collaboration from the stakeholders, I was a bit more conscious of scheduling them earlier in the morning, catching them before they were tired at the end of the day, just so that I can get their valuable insight. One of the other things that I took more of a conscious effort around is that, a lot of these stakeholders were meeting me for the first time with no context or background to who I am and what my background is. So having those conversations more upfront was really helpful. Just, light non-project related conversations, applying a little bit more of an empathy towards our stakeholders, just starting to understand what their current challenges are outside of the project. That provided me with additional insight around what could potentially get in the way of their future contributions or collaboration if required. So I think for me, it definitely was an interesting time, but I think there was a lot of learnings that came out of it, and just being a bit more conscious and trying to have those non-project related conversations, and the conversations that came out of that was really interesting for me.
Fantastic, thank you. And Steph, would you like to round out this question with your inputs?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely being empathetic to the times, to what's going on in everyone's lives individually, and also being empathetic to what's happening at the business. So at Trinity, our team was being pulled left and right for emergency COVID responses and communication. The departments were scrambling to figuring out what they were going to do for the summer and for the upcoming semesters. And so we really just tried to take a step back, take a breath, and really understand what's happening in everyone's world to figure out how far we can push or how far we can actually get along so that progress is still made. Another big aspect too is trusting and respect. So we've been working with ImageX for a number of years. And so we knew we had to lean on their expertise. We had to trust them. And we also had to respect any type of recommendation they would give back to us. It may not hit the mark 100%, but it's okay as long as it made progress and as long as it was 70 or 80% where we could take it and move forward. That's what we had to ground ourselves and care about the most, to not let us get too focused in on being a perfectionist like I am, but allow us to keep kind of moving forward and also leaning on each other, right? So there were times where Marta and Anisha had to lean on me or our team in order to figure out what this content is, or how do we approach the stakeholder? How do we communicate with them knowing that they're teaching classes or they're stressed in their own worlds or they're being pulled into some of these COVID meetings that we just had no control over. So we had to basically kind of use that and say, okay, well, if we can't rely 100% on the stakeholder, can we kind of think for them a little bit? Can we come to them with an option rather than saying, what do you think? And approaching it like, well, here's what we understand so far. Let us know if this hits the mark. Let us know how it doesn't hit the mark. You know, here's what we've researched, or here's where we've pulled from, or here's this type of content that we did similarly on another site. So trying to make the conversations easy as possible so people felt comfortable and they didn't feel pressured. And also they were able to give us the answers that we actually needed in order to complete the project.
Great, thank you, Steph. I am seeing a lot of questions coming in, and they're fantastic in the Q&A. I'm hesitating on answering them right now. We're trying to pay attention, but we will scan through and we will reply to each and every one of you. So thank you. With about 20 minutes left, let's go to the next slide. We've got 2 more questions for the panel, and then we'll jump into the audience Q&A. All right, starting with you, Anisha, what would you say is the one thing that contributed to this project's success for you?
Me, it was a close observation of our partnership, just within ImageX and our within our core team, project team. I felt like our team collaboration was so incredible. The communication lines were always open. And Sarah, I felt like if I had a concern or any potential blocker, I was able to easily come to you with those set of challenges. And then on our partnership with Stephanie and her team, I felt that they had a really close understanding of their stakeholders' needs and requirements. So as Stephanie was mentioning earlier, just coming in with a tighter partnership with them on their stakeholders' fronts. If there was ever a blocker on my side where I wasn't able to get the information that I needed from the stakeholder, I knew that I was able to rely on their project team to get access to those set of information. So I think overall, just the synergy that we shared amongst us was really valuable. And one last piece I wanted to mention, I think, because both Marta and I had a similar set of responsibilities as far as this project was concerned, we had a lot of one-on-one sessions where we shared and exchanged ideas. We were sometimes experiencing the same type of blockers. So there might have been times where Marta figured out a solution or vice versa. And I think that sharing and exchanging of information just amongst us was really helpful.
Great, thank you, Anisha. And Steph, what would you say is your top item for contributing to this project's success?
Yeah, so my of a tactic, I think the content strategy docs and the information architecture docs really saved our lives. Because the content strategy docs first started off with what is the site goal, who are your users, and what are they trying to achieve, and what are some of the user stories that we need to consider. So as a blank, I want to blank in order to do blank. And so putting it in that Mad Lib style where the stakeholders could easily kind of fill in the blanks helped our team focus and zero in as we were rewriting all of the content. And especially in the information architecture, Marta and Anisha did a fabulous job in terms of really setting page goals at that level too. So what is the goal for the home page? What is the goal for this third level menu item that, you know, maybe not too many people will access, but that page is still important for a particular set of users. So identifying the page goal, identifying the main call to actions on that page, and also laying out content ideas. Okay, we may not have this content right now, but we can at least leave room and make space for it in the future so that when we come back around to those stakeholders, that we'll be able to basically start with something instead of starting from scratch, if that makes sense. And also our component library, that definitely helps speed up the process and put everyone on the same level, no matter if you were a builder, if you were a writer, if you were an analyst. It allowed you to see, okay, well, this is how the content is formulated in the doc. We use tables inside of Google Docs in order to come up with a page layout. So you can clearly see which content is columnized versus which content is just, you know, within the main body. And those indicators from the component library helped you visually see, okay, well, now I can see how this content is going to be transferred from the Google Doc and into a digital space, because sometimes that is not so apparent. Some of us are visual learners and some of us can understand the theory, but we all know, like, we've projects where something that we've done in Google Docs does not translate directly 100% perfectly to the web, especially, you know, when you're dealing with mobile devices and iPads and tablets and things like that. So we were able to use those documents in order to speed up. And if it didn't translate over, that's okay, because then you're just refining the content on the page rather than tearing it all down and rebuilding it from scratch.
Thank you, Steph. Marta, anything else that you want to add here?
There is a lot covered already. Definitely the building trust and respect. That's been talked about quite a bit, so I don't want to take up too much time. So we still have time for a question and answers. But that was definitely a critical piece, both within ourselves, our stakeholders, and with Stephanie and your team. I can't speak enough about it. And that open communication as well. Thank you.
Definitely agree on that one. Okay, last one, Anisha, we can move to the last slide. All right, greatest lessons learned from this project. Steph, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, sure. My greatest lesson learned is to always remain agile and be adaptable. With a project of this sheer size, things are going to change. No matter how hard you try to plan it in the beginning, you can't plan everything. Life is going to happen. New projects are going to come in. Needs are going to shift, depending on what time you work with your stakeholders or your clients. But really using the agile method, we use sprints. So every 2 weeks, we settled upon the work that needed to get done so our team could focus. And then at the end of that sprint, we did a quick retrospective within the team to basically give me another chance to listen to how everyone's feeling. And those retrospectives, you know, consisted of, you know, what's happening in your personal lives versus the project, so that we could remain agile and adaptable.
Wonderful. Marta, what about you?
Yes, for me, part of it was just understanding and trusting the domain knowledge of Stephanie and her team and the stakeholders as well. That was really important for us, maybe more on the success piece. And then the other piece was we did have on paper, when we walked all of our stakeholders through, was understanding for this particular page, who is the main user is going to be coming in, what is the main goal they're trying to accomplish on that page. And it seems like a no-brainer, but really to keep coming back to that question over and over, it really helped the stakeholders stay focused, and it helped us be able to get through the substantial amount of content and pages. I mean, some sites were small, but others had hundreds of pages. So going through that for all the new information architecture for each one, going and understanding who needs to access that, what are they trying to get. If the content's not helping them, then maybe it doesn't need to be here. Maybe it needs to be somewhere else, or it doesn't need to be here at all. So it was really a purifying experience, but that was one of the biggest things. The other was being just flexibility in the tools and the templates and our process, adapting to what's working best right now or what works best for different stakeholders. And then one of the items we came in and started using was Loom videos, because we just didn't have the time to be setting up meetings with Stephanie and her team to do the knowledge transfer of, okay, this is what we learned from the stakeholders and these are our recommendations, and this is what we're thinking what the information architecture should look like, or the content strategy. So we'd videotape ourselves walking through the screen. You could see the mouse moving, so you know exactly what we're talking about and giving it context. So they could watch it at any time. I guess one of the drawbacks of working from home is you can be working literally at any time, middle of the night, early mornings, during the day. So it just gave us that flexibility, which is fantastic.
Thank you, Marta. And any last minute thoughts, Anisha, from you before we hop over to the Q&A?
Yeah, I'll just close off with last thought was, I thought that it was really valuable when I was coming in as a new project member into this and reviewing the sites and actually note-taking all of the assumptions that I was making along the way. As a new user looking at the stakeholder sites and content, I felt like that perspective, that view became really valuable in my conversations with the stakeholders, especially if the overall layout or structure didn't initially make sense to me as that new user. So I think just always documenting those list of assumptions that we're making along the way as we're strategizing and coming up with those proposals was really valuable.
Thank you. We'll just jump on to the next slide. I want to close with a final quote from Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it's done. And that's how some of us were feeling, I'm sure, at the beginning. But, as I mentioned earlier, when we got right into it, I knew we were going to get it done, and we did manage to get it done right on time. So I really want to extend my personal thanks to the team here and the extended team. I know some of you are here with us that worked on this project. It really was a huge success, in my opinion. We do have a lot coming in the Q&A, so I'm just going to hop over there, and we have just under 10 minutes. I've sorted by popular, so forgive us if we can't get to every question right now in the next few minutes, but we will go through and make sure that they are all answered. The top one right now that a lot of people are interested in is, was there any pushback from the microsite owners or the stakeholders, and how did you manage that? Who would like to answer that one?
I can start. Yes, there were pushback from some stakeholders and we realized that those were the stakeholders that cared the most about their websites, to be honest. So they were very concerned about the website changing or switching over to a new platform, and then also the ability of people being able to find that information. So to be quite honest, we just listened to their concerns. We asked for a blackout date. So, okay, well, if we were to go live on your site, what dates can we black out because there are major milestones that are happening on your end? And we documented and we negotiated. We said, okay, well, tell me the parts of your site that end users need to access very, very quickly that you're worried about. Well, we considered using added keywords to our search tool. So we use SwiftType application in order to manage and power our website search. We also asked how they were communicating directly through other platforms like email or social. We found out a lot of these stakeholders that were a little nervous were already connecting very well on social media platforms, and they're able to send users directly to the content. So that's how we kind of mitigated. We basically tried to understand their issues, really understand what happens in their world, and not just thinking about the website, but considering all of their communication tools of how we can basically get people adjusted to the new architecture.
Thank you, Steph. And I'm taking some notes as well, briefly, as you're answering. The next most popular one here, and it's going to be another one for you, Steph, is what was the background of the Trinity team? 2 web dev and 1 manager, question mark, or something else?
Yes, so there are 3 full-time employees that are dedicated to the website within the marketing team. Myself as a director, 1 web developer, and 1 web support manager that basically oversees our ticketing system. So not a lot of resources. Within the marketing team itself as a whole, there are a plethora of content writers and designers, but they're mainly kind of print focus based. And so the skill set of using web best practices and things were just very, very new to the team. Because we were underneath a time crunch, we made the decision to leverage ImageX's expertise as much as we could. And then also slowly through, a lot of trial and error, give other members of our team the opportunity in order to write content, edit content, design a graphic or an image, but at a smaller scale, so they didn't have to stop what they were doing in their regular day-to-day jobs to completely be focused on this one-time thing that is a scary project. So, and we were also able to leverage interns. Interns are your best friends if they're hungry and they're just wanting to work. So a lot of those tedious tasks that, would take a lot of time and effort to do, they were fully excited to do. And great quality assurance testers. I mean, documenting everything in terms of, well, this content doesn't make sense. And we had to guide them based on what they needed to focus on. And also there were a couple of resources within our Trinity team where we were able to help kind of bridge the gap between some writers that were doing writing for campaigns or other storytelling type and say, hey, this is kind of the same thing in terms of web. Let's see how you do on this other side of web, try it out. And if it worked well, we were able to give them more work. And if it didn't, we would say, okay, well, who's another team member that we could plug and play, or at least get it to 50 or 60% where they could help with a little bit, but not take on the whole thing.
Thanks, Steph, and thanks for touching upon testing as well. That was another popular question. So there was the testing of the content strategy, and even before that, when we had finished up the phase 2 of this project, we'd gone through quite an extensive quality assurance as well, testing, the back end and also the front end user experience and accessibility as well. Now, another question's jumped up to the top as popular, and Steph, we're putting you on the spot again because it's relative to you and because you are the designer and project manager and woman of many talents. But the question is, did you use Atomic Design System, Pattern Lab, Storybook, or others?
We researched it. We weren't able to apply all of the Atomic Design principles because of the time span. So we basically design components on certain use cases. So if there was a use case where users needed to quickly see all of the options and access a CTA in order to get to that content, then we designed a component that would do that, whether that be 2 columns or 3 columns or 4 columns. It may have had, a title, a short description, and a clear call to action. And we maybe put a limit on that call to action so you wouldn't have like 5 or 6 buttons sitting on top of each other. So there are aspects that we definitely read and understood. For our next phase of the project, we're actually focused on building out a web style guide based on everything that we have in the system. So the Figma component design library was just to get us through this next phase because we knew we had to help the builders, help the writers, and also help the people on the project kind of understand what the options are in the system at that time. And so now we're taking a step back and actually going to kind of re-audit some of our components to see if we can start using some of those Atomic Design principles in terms of organizing content, that it does kind of follow that true method.
All right, thank you very much. If we can squeeze in one last question in 30 seconds and leave 30 to wrap up, because this relates to the future and where we're going, which is kind of a nice way to end. So the question is, has the Trinity team been trained to take over their new architecture, theme, and design system? And are there any challenges with it? So once again, Steph, I'll call on you.
Yeah, not yet. Since this is kind of new and shiny, we're keeping our arms tight around this because we do have a lot of training and educating our campus to our new world. Previously, we would just, someone sends us content, we copy and paste it on the web, boom, if it works, and if it doesn't, oh boy. So now we know it needs to fall within the content strategy. So right now we're focused on redesigning our intake system and a project management in order to really dive deeper into, okay, well, if this person's asking for this one thing, and then another person's asking for something similar, and 10 other people are asking for the same thing, could this actually be a project that we can transparently say to the campus that this is what our team is doing? As far as opening it back up to the campus, I'm actually in conversations about trying to get web into some job descriptions. Our content editors range from, admin assistants to faculty members to dedicated communications people in the department. And so it's really hard to basically open the site back up and try to change those people because they also change over time. And so we're doing some web governance first in order to figure out, okay, now that we've completed the second phase, how do we continue to govern but also still service the campus? And looking at different types of approaches, whether that be top down, middle out, or bottom up.
Fantastic. And just to wrap it up, I want to say thank you very much to the panel for your participation. And I'd encourage you to check out the Q&A. I've been answering as much as possible, but there's a few more remaining questions. So please join us in the ImageX booth. We'll be available. We're going to take a short 10-minute break, but we'll be available for about 15 to 20 minutes over there. And that will wrap it up. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the conference, everybody.